Well, good morning, Year 7. Today we are going to be looking at crime and punishment in Tartarus. So we're going to have a look at some of the terrible crimes that men have committed in order to earn their place in Tartarus, the place where mortals are punished in the Greek underworld. So the first person that we're going to have a look at is Tantalus. Now, King Tantalus was good friends with the gods, or so they thought. So, in order to repay them for their friendship, he decided to invite them to a banquet at his palace. Oh, a lovely feast, they all thought. But Tantalus murdered his own son Pelops and cooked him up in a stew, and he decided to serve him up to the gods for dinner. Now, most of the gods did realise that there was something horribly, horribly wrong with the stew, and they did refuse to eat it. But Demeter, the goddess of the grain and harvest, Demeter was still really upset about the kidnap of her daughter Persephone, and she did absent-mindedly chew on one of the shoulders of the unfortunate Pelops. Zeus was absolutely outraged, and he immediately sent Tantalus to be punished in Tartarus. He also, very kindly, brought Pelops back to life, and he gave him a new shoulder that was made of ivory, one of the stories that we have from Greek mythology about people having a prosthetic limb. So the punishment that Tantalus was given fitted his crime very well indeed. He was tied to a pole in a pool of water, which reached very nearly to his chin. Whenever he felt thirsty, he'd bend his head to drink the water, but the water would always sink just out of his reach. There were fruit trees as well that dangled in front of his face, but whenever Tantalus tried to eat their fruits, the wind would always blow them just out of his reach. Tantalus was therefore hungry and thirsty forevermore. Now, you might notice that we get the English word tantalizing from the Greek name Tantalus. Now, Sisyphus. Sisyphus is one of the people that most people nowadays do actually know about. In his life, King Sisyphus was a very cunning man, and he did lots of different things to upset the gods. He was chief mischief maker. He gossiped about all the mortal girls that Zeus loved and got him into trouble with his wife Hera. Zeus decided to send Hades to take Sisyphus to Tartarus, but Sisyphus tricked Hades into locking himself in his own handcuffs. Sisyphus also lied to Persephone and got her to let him out of the underworld. He was that smart and that cunning. But eventually Zeus got absolutely fed up with his antics, and he decided to blast Sisyphus down to Tartarus himself. So as a punishment, Sisyphus had to push an enormous boulder up a really steep hill. When he got to the top, the boulder would roll down the other side, and he'd have to start all over again. So you may know there is an English phrase that we get from Sisyphus, and that is a Sisyphean task. A Sisyphean task is an impossible task. Next up, we're going to learn a bit about Ixion. Ixion fell out with his wife's father, Dionysus, over some wedding presents that he thought he was owed. Ixion invited Dionysus to dinner to talk things over. Or so he said. What he actually did was dig a pit under his guest's chair, and he lit a fire in it, and then he covered up the hole with reeds. So as soon as Dionysus sat down, his chair went crashing down into the pit, and he was burned to death. As a punishment, Ixion was chained to a burning wheel which spanned through the air forever. The next one we're going to have a look at is a man called Tityus. Tityus was a giant who climbed to the top of Mount Olympus, and he attacked Leto, the mother of the twins Apollo and Artemis. In Tartarus, Tityus was pegged out on the ground, while giant vultures pecked at his insides. Now, this might sound a bit familiar, to people who have already remembered the story of Prometheus. The next crimes and punishments that we're going to have a look at are by a set of girls called the Danaids. So King Danaus had 50 daughters, and they were called the Danaids. And he had a brother, Egyptus, who had 50 sons. You get absolutely no prizes, I'm afraid, for telling me that Egyptus is, we have a word that comes from his name in modern times, and that is the country, the African country, Egypt. So the story is that Danaus and Egyptus fell out over their inheritance. Each brother was determined to get his hands on the other's money, so they decided to marry their children to each other. Egyptus ordered his sons to murder their new wives as soon as they were married, and Danaus ordered his daughters to do the same. But the wives were much, much quicker than their husbands. On their wedding day, they'd hidden long pins in their hair which they used to stab their husbands through the heart during the night. Quite a violent lot, these Greeks, aren't they? So in Tartarus, the punishment that the Danaids received was to fill a broken pot with water that they had to carry in sieves. So your task for today then. Your main task is to show me what you've learnt about crimes and punishments in Tartarus. So for each of the different people that we've studied, you can either write the crime and draw the punishment, or you can draw the punishment, or you can draw the crime and write the punishment. And you need to do it for each of the following people. You need to do it for Tantalus, Titius, Sisyphus, Ixion, and the Danaids. The best way to do this would probably be to divide an A4 sheet of paper into 12 equal squares, just like I've done here. And I have attached this to Satchel 1 for you, if you would prefer to just print out a PDF and do it that way. An extension task for you to do, but if you have managed to finish this within the first hour, your first extension task is to come up with your own idea for a crime and an appropriate punishment. So think, how would the Greek gods punish the crime? Think about Tantalus and how, his crime was to do with food and drink. So the Greek gods actually turned that around on him, and they made it so he would never eat or drink ever again. So try and think of how the Greek gods would punish the crime. As a second extension task, if you're a particularly fast worker, I'd like you to look at the punishments. I'd like you to write a paragraph for me and tell me which punishment would you rather suffer out of all of the options. Okay, I hope you have a good time looking at doing this task for me, and I will speak to you next week.